on in, everyone. I'm going to ask your indulgence because my back hurts and I'm going to sit. If you can't see me, that's good. There's nothing much to see. So come on in, have a seat. Welcome back. I'm Ed Feinstein. I live in LA. I was a rabbi for many, many years in a big synagogue in LA. It's not really a big synagogue. It's a small African country. We have our own zip code. And that's where Rabbi Joshua was raised. And we had a wonderful time growing up together. So come in. And as I said this morning, I am a congregational rabbi. So if you find yourself drifting off, close your eyes, let it go, don't hold back. I'll feel right at home. I've been talking to sleeping people for 45 years. So this will make me feel just at home. It's a conservative synagogue, and that's what we do. I'm a graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary, the largest school of anesthesiology on the planet, and would be very happy to service you in that way. I wanted to talk, so thank you to Rabbi Hal for the opportunity to do a little more learning together, and then we'll actually really go home and have a nap. October 7th has changed so much, and I think that when history is written, this is going to be the year of a significant turning point in our collective history. We don't yet know what the full implications of this are, but I can see already, we can feel something going on around us. And what I'm going to suggest to you, and maybe this is hyperbole, but I fear I'm not off, is that the two great foundational myths, the two great foundational truths that have underlie 20th century Judaism, post-war Judaism, both here and in Israel, have been shaken, if not shattered. In Israel, the idea that Israeli sovereignty is going to save the Jewish people, which was Herzl's great gift to the Jewish people, that sovereignty would change the condition of the Jew in the world, that the Jew in the world would no longer be unsafe, would no longer be a pariah, left out of the world conversation, that the Jew in the world's the condition of the Jew in the world would change substantially with given sovereignty, given a country with a flag and a government and an army. And that most of all, the army. Israel's myth that the IDF, Tzahal, is invincible and beyond reproach in any way at all, that myth, the myth of Israeli sovereignty and the myth of the invincibility of the IDF, of Tzahal, have been shaken, if not shattered. Certainly shaken, if not shattered, right? When the Iranians launched 300 missiles and drones at Israel, Israel depended upon a coalition of America, England, France, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan to defend it. Now, thank God for that. And thank God that world leaders saw the need and the necessity of doing that. But that means, for the first time in its history, Israel really needs to recognize that it depends upon a world community of goodwill in order to survive. And that changes everything in the landscape of Israeli internal conversations. It changes the sense of Israelness. In the diaspora here, we have depended upon liberal democracy to protect us. And liberal democracy has come through for us again and again and again. And through liberal democracy, just like through Israeli sovereignty, we have gained enormous power in the world. Herzl's fundamental principle was it's the powerlessness of the Jewish people that invites destruction. So we need to gain power. The most convenient, easy way to gain world power is to have a country, because a country comes with an army and a seat in the United Nations. And in the diaspora, we understood the same thing. We need to have power. I was a kid when the Soviet Jewry movement was going on. Anybody remember that? Right? We discovered, Elie Wiesel in 1963 writes Jews of Silence, and suddenly American Jewry discovered the 2.5 million Jews in the former Soviet Union who were being held captive, and we organized a political campaign. It was the first great Jewish campaign to protect Jews around the world. I mean, I remember at 15 years old, I was protesting for Soviet Jews, crazy all over the place. And I asked my mom, I said, Mom, wonderful woman, my mother, Mom, you were 15 years old when the Holocaust began. Did you go demonstrate at the White House like we did? Did you go demonstrate in front of the German embassy like we did? She said, no. We couldn't do that. We were afraid to be too visible and too noisy. We were afraid to be out. Right? And I said, Mom, didn't you think to go and chain yourself to the gates of the White House to save Jews? And she said, we couldn't do it. We were afraid. You can do it. Your generation has the voice. And what happened is from the mid-60s onward, Jews began to build this base of power. This base of power. You remember the story. In 1944, 400 rabbis, mostly Orthodox rabbis, went to Washington to protest in front of the Roosevelt administration and demand that the Roosevelt administration take stronger steps to save Jews. And Roosevelt wouldn't see them. Right? Gardner, as the vice president, came out to see them, but Roosevelt wouldn't see, or not 44, 42. Gardner came out to see them. The Speaker of the House came out to see them. Roosevelt wouldn't see them because he didn't want to get involved. He didn't want the war to be interpreted as a Jewish war. He was trying to get America more involved in the war, and he wouldn't see them. That's remarkable now when you consider, just today, that the husband of the vice president is a Jew. The Secretary of State is a Jew and the child of Holocaust survivors. The Attorney General is a Jew. The Secretary of the Treasury is a Jew. The Secretary of Homeland Security is a Jew. And I could go on, right? I mean, we have changed, we have depended upon the invitation of liberal democracies to welcome us in. And what was the doorway? What was the doorway to Jewish power under the banner of liberal democracy? The university. We came into universities. In the beginning, when God created the heaven and the earth, Harvard University had a quota. That's why so many Jewish kids went to CCNY, because Harvard wouldn't let you in, Columbia wouldn't let you in, Princeton would let no Jew in. My brother tried to go to Stanford, they wouldn't let him in. He has a PhD from Yale, so don't worry, he did okay. What happened? Over the course of the 20th century, those barriers fell, and the university invited us in, and we became part and parcel of American higher education. Well, what's happened this year? That institution has betrayed us. You know, and you would think that it would be some outward play. You'd think that maybe Jews at the University of, I don't know, Oklahoma, Arkansas, they'd be the ones in trouble. No, Columbia. You know how many Jews are? Penn. Anyone know the University of Penn? Graduated from University of Pennsylvania is the world's biggest Jewish day school, right? Right? I mean, there's like 40% of Penn is Jewish. Harvard, UCLA in my neighborhood. The idea that somehow liberal democracy is no longer welcoming, and that liberal democracy in its own right is in trouble in this world, but liberal democracy as a promise to American Jews of their place in the world is shaking. It's shaking. I'm not saying it's shattered yet, but it's shaking. And that leaves us all with a sense of unease. When I said earlier, as we were talking about Rabbi Joshua Jacobs, that the moment calls upon us to begin to think about how we're going to do Judaism next. That's where we are right now. We're at one of those remarkable crises. Let's talk about that in a minute. Once again, as I said before, we Jews pride ourselves on tradition. It's the first song in Fiddler on the Roof, right? Tradition. Everybody knows that song because everybody knows that show, because that's our origin story. We all came from Tevi and Golden, right? Right? Tradition. And we look upon tradition as a source of authenticity and truth. We see ourselves as part of an unbroken chain of tradition, going back to Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Rachel and Leah and Moses and Aaron, Isaiah and Jeremiah, Hillel and Shammai, and the Rambam and Rashi and the Zohar. We go back, we see ourselves as part of a chain of tradition. And that's what our pride is. That's where our sense of authenticity comes from. That's where our sense of identity comes from. And rightly it should, because there are very few things in the world that are being preserved from 3,800 years ago. Very few things in the world. I remember Nina and I, we spent some time in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Anyone ever been there? Beautiful city. So they take you to see the Indian reservation. The Pueblo Indians live there, right? Wonderful people. They make beautiful things. And they have petroglyphs, these scratchings on the rock. And they say, oh, this is ancient. It's from 1550. It's like, you scratched on rocks in 1550. My ancestors wrote the Shulchan Aruch in 1550. I mean, we've been doing this a long time. It's an amazing thing. And yet, and as much as we revere tradition, what comes from that, from a responsibility to carry on tradition, is to pass it on to the next generation. The great anxiety of the narrative of tradition is, will my grandchildren take this as seriously as my grandparents did? That's the anxiety. Will my kinderlach take it on? So we look around ourselves and say, how come there are not more young people in shul? Taka had a lot of young people in shul today, so don't be embarrassed. But we always look around and say, how come there are not young people? How do we get the young to buy into this story? That's the anxiety that comes with tradition, because I don't want to be the last link in the chain. I made a promise, v'shinantam levanecha, to teach your children diligently, and try to get my kids to adopt this way of life, this truth. That's tradition. But there is a second narrative, a second way of looking at our history that runs contrapuntal to the first. And that's not the narrative of tradition, but the narrative of revolution. Or to put it in a different language, tradition is a narrative of continuity. There is a narrative of discontinuity. Put it this way, at certain points in our history, events from outside or developments from within necessitated a reinvention of what we call tradition, a renewal of tradition, a reinterpretation of core Jewish values, a restatement of core Jewish purposes, a reimagining of where we fit in the world, a recreating of our institutions. The synagogue I work in is a traditional conservative synagogue. My Zayda would not recognize it. I always imagine what would happen if Zayda walked through the synagogue. 7:30 in the morning, there's a Tai Chi class. Ladies who drop off their kinderlach in the nursery school, they're all wearing these gesundheit, these gatkas, right? Lululemon, what's it called? Lululemon, right, Lululemon. Zayda would call them gatkas, They wear these gesundheit, they're very nice ladies. I mean, whew. And I could just see Zayda walking by, and these ladies are going. So he'd look, he'd say, "This is Meshuggah epis." I'd say, "No Zayda, Gedavnin." Gedavnin? Translation, it's not crazy Zayda, they're praying, right? They're davening. Oh, Gedavning, shockling. Oh, shockling epis. They're davening. I said, he'd understand. Like, what's a Tai Chi class doing in a synagogue? Right? It's Tai Chi, so don't it's Nishgoyishkeit. It's not theirs. It's ours. But you understand that the other narrative of Jewish life is the reinvention of our culture at certain critical points. And at those points, here's the important thing. At those points of crisis, we cannot simply continue. What we learn from our history is that were we to continue through those points of crisis doing the same thing we always did, we would have died. We would have died as a people, right? Because those are the points of crisis when somebody had to recognize that what got us here is not going to get us there. And it takes an enormous courage to say, what I inherited doesn't work anymore. I have to do something different with it. It takes enormous vision and imagination to say, what could it be? What should it be? What might it be? It takes enormous wisdom to know what to change and what not to change, and how to go about doing this. And it takes enormous creativity to know how to communicate that to a generation of people. And that's what happens in moments of crisis. That's what happens in moments of crisis. And ladies and gentlemen, we are living through a threefold crisis at the moment. Let's do each one of them quickly. Number one is the crisis of Jewish modernity. And the crisis of Jewish modernity began 300 years ago. But you know this because you know Fiddler on the Roof. See, everybody thinks Fiddler on the Roof is about tradition, tradition. Nonsense. Fiddler on the Roof is about what came and destroyed tradition. Tevye has 5 daughters, Gesundheit, right? And the whole show is about the 5 daughters, because the 5 daughters live this world of tradition. And in tradition, every piece of your life, remember he said, we all know who we are and what God expects us to do. Every piece of your life is governed by tradition, including who you're going to marry, which is why, matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match, find me a find, catch me a catch. Matchmaker is so important because that's how Papa and Mama know who to match you up with. So what happens in the show? Yenta, it's a funny name, by the way, the matchmaker comes, because she knows everybody's business, comes in and she says, Mazel Tov, I have a match for Tzeitel. Who is Tzeitel? It's Tevye's oldest daughter. She's a little overripe. She's 19 years old and unmarried, Nebuch, right? Because she doesn't have any of the advantages. What gave you advantages? Number one, Yichus. You were related to a great rabbi, okay? If you were related to a great rabbi, that's number one. Number two, your father was very rich. Right? In those days, you know, a girl is beautiful and learned, but if she has 500,000 shares of Microsoft, that makes her absolutely ravishing. Because that means a young boy could study and didn't have to work, you see? And number three, if she was attractive, right? You know? So Tzeitel is a nice girl. She's a nice girl, okay? No yichus, no money, and she's a nice girl. So finally, Mienta comes in and says, I have a match for Tzeitel, the butcher Laser Wolf. Now tell me about the butcher. He's Tevye's age. He's old as her father. He's a drunk. He's an abuser. He's a miserable, smelly man. There's only one great advantage to marrying the butcher. You'll never starve. Tevye is so excited, he goes off to the bar, and he ties one on with the local Russian peasantry. To life, l'chaim. And he comes back and he meets Tzeitel at the gate of the homestead. And he said, Tzeitel, you're going to get married. Mazel tov, I'm so happy. She says, Papa, I refuse the match. Suddenly, Tevye is stone cold sober. What do you mean you refused the match? Well, I'm already engaged. Oh, you're already engaged. Who got you engaged? We did. You did. Oh, Mazel tov. And to whom are you engaged? You're not going to marry the rich, not so attractive butcher. You're going to marry a skinny, starving, unaccomplished tailor named Mottel Kemzoil. Why would you want to marry a skinny, unattractive man? Because, Papa, say it, I love him. To which Tevye responds with the immortal words of Tina Turner, what's love got to do with it? Love's just a second-hand emotion, right? But she says, I love him. And with that, modernity breaks. Modernity breaks tradition. Tradition meant the authority over my life is in God's hands. God can tell me what to do. My family can tell me what to do. The community gives me expectations. But with Tzeitel's evocation of love, I now control my own existence. Choice is the essence of modernity. And we live in a world of choices. And choice is what destroys modernity. And then the second daughter, you remember, runs away with Perchik the revolutionary. Tradition said, wait for God's Messiah. Redemption will come when God decides. But the revolutionary says, no, we will take history on our own hands. Bolsheviks, socialists, communists, Zionists, capitalists, all said, we will control our own history. And the third daughter runs away with the Russian boy, Fietka, that she meets in the library because the world of Jewish life was a closed world, a cognitively isolated world, and she wants to know what the world knows. And suddenly Tevye realizes he's in a different world. That's modernity, and we're still playing with that. We're still figuring out how do you get people to come to shul? How do you get people to identify with Jewish? I was a kid. We never asked the question, why be Jewish? If we asked the question, why be Jewish, my mother would tell me about all the relatives who died in Auschwitz, and that was the answer. But my kids don't have that. My kids earnestly ask me, why should I be Jewish, Dad? And they mean it, and they expect an answer. That's our place in modernity. That's the first problem. Then the second problem comes in the middle of the 20th century. The greatest moment of destruction in the history of the Jewish people was the destruction of the temple in the year 70 by the Romans. The Holocaust exceeds it. The greatest moment of redemption in the history of the Jewish people was Exodus from Egypt. The recreation state of Israel exceeds it. Problem is that Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, and Churban Abayit, the destruction of the temple, 1,500 years apart. The Holocaust, the state of Israel, and then I would add to that the advent of liberal democracy in America that gave us more freedom than any culture ever gave us. These events all come in the same generation. How does a culture make sense of that? How do you make sense of that? That's the second crisis. And now the third crisis comes with October 7th, with the shaking of our faith in Israeli sovereignty and the power of Tzahal, the power of the IDF, and our shaking of our faith in liberal democracy and where we fit in a country when anti-Semitism is so rampant. And that becomes our question. And that's why this moment we have to ask ourselves, so what does Jewish mean now? So what is the role of the synagogue now? So what is Israel in our lives now? So how do we teach our children now? So what is the meaning of Torah now? So what is our mission, our purpose as a people now? That's the moment we're living in. Now, I've depressed you. That's good. I'm a rabbi. It's my job to depress you. You're to go home and feel lousy. No, I don't want you to do that. Now I'm going to give you a little hope. You ready? We're good at this. Because we're such an old people and we've been through so much history, we have a special talent for meeting crises. And you're about to see it happen, partly because you hired a rabbi who's an expert in this, because he has this enormous capacity for invention and imagination, partly because you're going to see it all over the Jewish world. Now, when you see this happening, I'm going to give you a warning. This is the warning label on contemporary Jewish life. It's going to shock you. It's going to surprise you. It's going to upset you. It's going to engage you. It's going to inspire you. Just enjoy all of those feelings. Just don't stop the process. My Zayda would come into my shul and he wouldn't recognize it. We have a woman Persian cantor. My Zayda would say, "Vos is das? Chazan." No, just not chazan. Right? She has a law degree too on top of it all. I mean, you see things in our shul. You have a beautiful, beautiful cantor. My Zayda wouldn't recognize. But think about that. A woman cantor singing the traditional liturgy in traditional melodies. Do you see what we did there? Do you see how that worked? I mean, we're taking the old and making it new. But sometimes it's unsettling because it's not what we're used to. We're not what we're used to. We Jews are not good at that kind of change. So I'm begging you to let it happen. Don't hold it. You know the old joke? The United Nations gathered all the world religions, and they decided they'll make world peace by creating one world religion. So the Catholics step up and they said, in the name of world peace, we give up the Trinity. And the Protestants came up and said, in the name of world peace, we give up the crucifix. And the Muslims said, in the name of world peace, we give up the jihad. And the Jews got up and said, in the name of world peace, we'll give up the second Yakum Purkan after the Kriya, right? We'll give up half of Musaf. In the name of world peace, we give up half, because we Jews, we want change, but just don't change any melody of the shul. Right? I like Adon Olam Asher Malach, the dullest melody ever written. If I told you now it was once a German beer drinking song, would you believe? I did. I went to Germany, and it's true. They sit around the table going, Adon Olam Asher. We have to let this process happen, even though it's going to give us a Judaism that might not be what we're used to. Because again, it's not for us. It's for my children and my grandchildren. We are good at this. We have had a long history of dealing with these kinds of crises. And if we look back in that history will teach us how to deal with moments like this one. Let's go back in that history for a moment, okay? I want to take you back to the last great crisis before modernity. And that crisis was the destruction of the temple in the year 70. See, let me just stop one more point. We invest our tradition in books. We are a people of books. But look at the books. The books of the tradition were not written in quiet moments. The books of the tradition were all written in moments of crisis. The Bible was put together in exile after the first temple was destroyed in 586. The Talmud, we'll see in just a moment, was created after the destruction of the second temple in 70. Maimonides comes about when Greek philosophy, by way of the Arab-speaking world, attacks the foundations, the truth foundations of Jewish thought. The Zohar, the mystical tradition, comes about when the Reconquista takes over Spain and makes Jewish life untenable in Iberia. Hasidism comes about when Jewish piety of the 17th century falls apart in the face of pogroms. And Zionism comes about when Jewish life in Eastern Europe becomes unbearable in the 19th century. It's our crises that have been the most powerful inspirations for our creativity. So come with me on a little trip. Let's go back to 70. The most beautiful building in the world was the ancient Temple of Jerusalem. It was built by Solomon in the year 970 BCE, destroyed by the Babylonians in 586, rebuilt by Ezra in 444, and then in the year 40 BCE, 40 before zero, it's remodeled by a terrible man named Herod. Herod was a horrible human being, but a fabulous contractor. Maybe that goes together, I don't know. But he remodeled it, and he wanted to make it a monument to his mentor, to Augustus Caesar. So he creates this magnificent temple. If you walked onto the mount of the Holy Temple, what you got there now is pishachs. The whole mountain was flattened and made bigger. Today, the Kotel. Everybody go to the Kotel? Everybody go to the Kotel? You know what the Kotel is? It's not the wall of the temple. It's not the outer wall of the temple. It's the retaining wall of the hill. While you pray at a retaining wall, we got to talk. Right? You know that story. The Jew says, I prayed to God. My wife was sick. She got sicker. My daughter was in a bad shape. She got worse. My finances were awful. Sometimes, God, I think I'm talking to a wall. Herod paved the Temple Mount with marble. The temple was a marble cube with a golden parapet around the top. 3 colonnades, 3 layers of marble columns surrounded it. It was the most tourists came to see this place. I mean, it's a beautiful shul, Hal, but I don't know if tourists come here, right? I mean, it's amazing. The place was a tourist attraction in the Roman Empire. But more than a tourist attraction, it was the center of Jewish life. It was the core of Jewish life. It's where every Jew turned when they prayed. It was every Jew made pilgrimage there. It was where God lived, literally. In the middle of the temple was a room called the Holy of Holies, Kodesh HaKodeshim. In the first temple, that's where the Ark of the Covenant was, the one that Harrison Ford found in a movie, remember? In the second temple, there was nothing in the room, but it was believed that God lived in that room. So much so that nobody went into that room except the high priest on the holiest day of the year. The holiest guy on the holiest day of the year went in there to say the holiest prayer, to pray for his people. He would spend a month getting ready to go in with a clear mind, dressed in gleaming white gleaming white clothes, take a censer full of incense, fill the room with smoke, and then walk in there to pray for his people. And they were so sure that God lived in that room and it was dangerous to go in there that before that guy went in, they tied a rope around his leg. In case he would drop dead in the middle of the ritual, they could schlep him out and no one else would have to risk their lives. That's how they thought of the temple. God lived in a building, in a room in Jerusalem. And in the year 70, the Romans got tired of governing rebellious Jews, so they sent their best army. They encircled the city. They breached its walls. They tore down the temple. They murdered the priests. They destroyed the Temple Mount. They destroyed the city. They destroyed the Jewish world. Imagine what that looked like to the survivors. Imagine what that looked like. Everything that was sacred to them was broken. There was no temple. There was no place where God could be met. There were no priests. There were no sacrifices. There were no cultural events that took place at the temple anymore. There was no land that was ours. There was no city that was home. So you can imagine what happened. I would imagine that most of the Jews who saw that said, God hates us, or there is no God. This has all been a lie. And they assimilated into the Roman Empire, right? And we never heard from them again. And a few of them followed a small sect called Christians that said, because you killed God's Messiah, this is your punishment. And I'm sure a few Jews went off and followed that pathway. But the few Jews that wanted to stay Jewish, what did they do? Well, there was one teacher named Yochanan ben Zakkai who left. He was part of a rabbinic group, this small group of the rabbis, and they decided this rebellion was a bad idea, so they cut a separate peace with the Romans, and the Romans in reward gave them a little place down by the seashore called Yavne, where Yochanan ben Zakkai set up an academy. And I imagine that the survivors who wanted to figure out Judaism came down to Rabbi Yochanan. And they stood in for Rabbi Yochanan and they asked him these questions. Wie geht's? Where do we go now? What do we do now? What does being Jewish mean now? There's no sacrifices, no temple, no priests, no city, no government, no land, no nothing. And I'm sure they asked them the most bitter question of Holocaust survivors. Is there a God? Did God let this happen? Why would God let this happen? Does God hate us? Now think about what Yochanan ben Zakkai could have said to them. He could have given them the conservative, small c, answer and said, we have to keep doing what we've always done. We have to keep the faith. We can't do anything rash. Let's just keep being Jewish as we always did before. How long would that have lasted? One generation. But the next generation would have said, to hell with this. This is not worth it. Or he could have said to them, you're right. It's over. The Jewish game is over. We don't have a temple. We don't have priests. God hates us. Let's go do let's do something else. That's another way to do it. What did he say? What did he do? Well, nobody knows, except me. I happen to know, because I found the answer, because he left notes. He left notes. There's a book of the Talmud that's unlike any other book of the Talmud. It's the only book of the Talmud that has no law, and it's the only book of the Talmud that has no controversy. Imagine that, Jews without arguing, right? It's called Pirkei Avot. It's Mishnah, right? And in Pirkei Avot, we have what Yochanan ben Zakkai said to them. We have exactly what Yochanan ben Zakkai said to them. Look at that. Look at the top of your page here. Ready? What's the first thing he said to them? The first thing he said to them was, Kol Yisrael yesh lem chelek leolam haba. All Jews have a portion in the world to come. What's the most radical word in that sentence? All. See, we Jews are really good at this. We say, all Jews are welcome, except the Reform. Except the ones who aren't as Zionist as me. Except the ones who are Republican, or the ones who are Democrat, or the ones who are Democrat but vote Republican, or the ones who don't give enough money to do show. We're really good at adding qualifications to welcoming. But Yochanan ben Zakkai says what? All Jews. We don't care who you were before. Before you were Democrat, Republican, Zionist, anti-Zionist.
Conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, renewal, God knows what you were, or whatever you were, it doesn't matter anymore. We need everyone. Big tent. The first rule of reconstructing a Jewish community after a crisis is radical welcoming. We will find a place for everyone who wants to be here. I don't care who your mother was. She wasn't Jewish, but you want to learn Torah? Come on in. We'll find a place for you at the Kiddush. I don't care if your parents were Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Israeli, not Israeli, pro-Israeli, anti. It doesn't matter anymore. We need you. You want to be here? You want to learn Torah? You want to join the conversation? Sit down. We have something to talk about. All Jews have a place in the world to come. All Jews have a place at the table now. Radical inclusivity. Second rule. Look at the second one. Ready? Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moses got the Torah at Sinai, gave it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great assembly, who said three things: be patient in the administration of justice, rear disciples, and make a fence around Torah. What's that sentence about? It's about Torah. We don't have a temple anymore. We don't have a place, but we have Torah. Torah will now be the center of our Jewish life. When you pray, which way do you turn? East. Except when? Except if the ark is in the room. And if an ark with a Torah is in the room, which way do you turn? Toward the ark. Why? Because the ark is our New Jerusalem. Because where the Torah is where we pray. Torah is the center, the focal point of Jewish life. And the whole business is about passing on Torah. Right? What did they teach? Be patient in the administration of justice. Live Torah. Find a way to make it apply to every aspect of your life. Rear disciples. Teach Torah. Make a fence. Legislate Torah. Expand the realm of Torah. Right? There's a composting thing out here. Did everybody see the composting thing? Right? This is Rabbi Joshua's Mishigas. Okay? Why? Why? Because the first commandment of the Torah, believe it or not, is not pru or vu. It should be, but it's not. When Adam is put into the Garden of Eden, two words are added to that sentence. L'shamra u'le'ovda. To guard and to cultivate God's garden. That's the first mitzvah. The kids in my shul ask me, is recycling a mitzvah? We have these big recycling bins on the lunch yard. They have to put their potato chip wrappers and their Coke cans. And I say, yeah, recycling's a mitzvah. Why? It says, because it says in the Torah, l'shamra le'ovda, you have to protect and cultivate God's garden. So the kids ask me a great question. What's the bracha? If it's a mitzvah, there must be a bracha. So we did something you're not allowed to do. It says, I do that a lot. We wrote a bracha. No, seriously, and I want you to use this bracha. Baruch atah Adonai, blessed is God, Eloheinu melech haolam, whose presence fills the world, Asher kitshanu mitzvotav vetzivanu, who has sanctified us with mitzvot, vetzivanu, and commanded us, lishmor et hagan, to protect God's garden. Amen. Put the Coke can in the blue bin. Put your scraps in the composting pile. It's a mitzvah. That's called making a fence around the Torah, expanding the realm of Torah. Get it? Everybody got that? That's what rabbis do. And Jews. That's what we do. Now the next one. Ready? This is the real answer. When the Jews of 70 came to Yochanan ben Zakkai crying and saying to him, do we have a future? This is what he said. He quoted his teacher. Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik taught, Al Shalsha Dvarim Al Mamed, on three things the world stands: Torah, Avodah, Gemilut, Chesed. Everyone know that before? All right, I want you to look at that very carefully. These were people who just saw their world shattered because the institution that was at the core and center of their faith and culture and life was taken from them in one afternoon in the summer of 70 by the Romans, by the pagans. God's not supposed to let that happen. God's supposed to bring frogs from on high, and that didn't happen. There were no frogs and other kind of darkness and death of the first. Nothing happened. The temple was destroyed. God didn't stop them. So they said to him, what gives? And he said to them, Ha'olam omed. The world stands. Oh, by the way, just to get this perfectly clear to you. It wasn't just a metaphor. It wasn't just a metaphor. The Temple of Jerusalem is built on a big piece of rock. That's Even HaShtiyah, the foundation stone of the universe. That's where Abraham was supposed to sacrifice Isaac, and other great things happened there, right? That's the centerpiece of the universe. The Romans, the way they broke the temple, they didn't tear it down, they blew it up. The temple was made out of limestone. Limestone is calcium carbonate. If you want to destroy calcium carbonate, all you got to do is build a big fire. And the rock will blow up. They saw it blow up. They literally, by the way, the rock survived. Don't worry. It's under that very attractive golden dome, which is called the Dome of the Atazoi, see? What happens? They thought the rock was blown up. If the rock was blown up, the earth was knocked off its axis. They literally thought their world was knocked off its axis. Ha'olam omed, he says to them. I'll give you another one. Which way do we face when we're davening besides the ark? Which way do we face? East. If you're east, you are oriented. Lose your center in the east, you suddenly suffer from disoriented. Get it? Get it? Your compass faces north, right? But for a Jew, a compass faces east. As long as I'm facing east, I know where I am in the universe. But when the temple was destroyed, I had nothing to face. So the Jews say to him, our world is completely knocked off its axis. It's dizzying. And he comes back and says, no. Ha'olam omed, the world stands. Your world, you didn't lose a world, and you didn't lose your God. What did you lose? A building in Jerusalem. Big deal. You didn't lose your world. Why? Because your world stands on 3 pillars which they can't destroy. What are the 3 pillars they can't destroy? Torah. It stands on learning. Every Jewish community is about learning. And what is the institution of learning? Beit Midrash. Now, we don't have a word for that in English. I'll tell you why. Because the English word school means a place where kindlech go, right? And there is no such word in Hebrew. In Hebrew, we use Beit Sefer, which should be library, because it means a book place. But there's no, because a Beit Midrash was never a place for children. A Beit Midrash was a place for grown-ups. Kids could come to the Beit Midrash, but until they reached a certain level of literacy, they were put in a room off to the side. The word room in Hebrew is cheder. Anybody go to cheder as a kid? Right, that's where the word comes from. You went to the cheder where the kindlech were taught, and when you gained sufficient literary skills, you were allowed into the Beit Midrash. You were permitted to enter into the Beit Midrash because in the Jewish mind, learning is a lifelong profession. When Tevye dreams about being a rich man, yidle deedle 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 die, all day long I'd biddy biddy bum if I were a wealthy man. Ready? I'd sit and study holy books 7 hours every day. That would be the sweetest thing of all. In America, you go to school to make a living. In Jewish life, you make a living so you have time to sit and study. You have time to. I have in my library, somebody gave me a book. It's a collection of Mishnayos from the Baker's Mishnah Circle of Bialystok. I have family from there. My father's a baker. What is it? Bakers finish work 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They go to work 3 o'clock in the morning, finish 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's my dad's life. The bakers of Bialystok, before they went home, went from the bakeries to the Beis Midrash. And they learned for an hour. And then they went home. Every guild, every professional group had a circle of learning. We do learning as adults. That is our profession. So the first core of Jewish life, the first new pillar is Torah, learning. What's the second one? Avodah, which means worship. We don't have sacrifice anymore. Now we have prayer. What's the center of prayer? Beit Knesset, synagogue. Synagogue, place where we gather for prayer, right? And what's the third one? Gimilut Chesed, acts of kindness. What institution do you learn kindness? In what institution do you learn kindness? The practice of kindness. Tell me. Say what? Home. Home. The Bible doesn't say anything about Jewish homes. Nothing. The Talmud has a little bit, but as the tradition got moving, what happens is the Talmud develops a theology of home. A theology of Jewish home is a rabbinic invention in response to the destruction of the temple. And what happens at home? We recreate the affectations of the temple. Friday night. Anybody here do Friday night at home? Right. So what happens is you make a nice table, you make a meal, you sit down, you light candles, you bench kiddush, bless your kids, and then before you eat your challah, your $17.50 gluten-free, high protein, high fiber, whole wheat, spelt flour, Belgian chocolate, Indonesian basil, challah. I live in LA. This is what we do. Before you touch the challah, you have to do one more thing. What do you have to do? You have to wash your hands, and you make a bracha. Asher kitshana mitzvotav etzivanu al nitilat yadayim. Where are you commanded to wash your hands in the Torah? You're not. Who is? The high priest. And then you take this $19.50 Tahitian vanilla, Belgian chocolate, Indonesian basil, high protein, low fat, gluten-free pretzel challah, and before you touch it, you make motzi, and then before you eat it, what do you do? One more crazy thing to it. You pour salt all over this challah. Why? Because every sacrifice in the temple was offered with salt. You become the priest. The challah, by the way, the word challah is a sacrifice. It's not just bread. It's the name of a sacrifice. You become a priest. Your meal becomes an offering. Your table becomes an altar. Your home becomes a temple. They brought all of the sanctity of the temple into your house. 1990, the Dalai Lama, who's the leader of Tibetan Buddhism, who's been in exile since he was a little kid in 1958, he convened a group of Jewish scholars to come to his place in India, in the north of India, Dar es Salaam, and he asked them a simple question. We are in exile from our homeland. You've been in exile from your homeland for 2,000 years. How'd you do it? How'd you survive? And he listened to some wonderful answers from people. They said, it's our learning, it's our charity, it's our commitment to family. But the answer that grasps his imagination, anyone know who Yitz Greenberg is? His wife is named Blue. She's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant scholar and poet. Blue Greenberg said, Your Holiness, the Jewish home. We preserved our traditions at home. There's no such thing as a Buddhist home. If anything, Buddhism means you leave behind your home. You push away those attachments. But the Jewish home, we take it so for granted, we Jews, because it's so natural to us. Where are you going to have your Seder? At home. Where are you going to light Hanukkah licht? At home. Where are you going to light Shabbos lights? At home. You know, where are you going to eat Hamantash? At home, right? Where are you going to fight with your kids? At home. I mean, it's so Jewish, right? But you have to understand that this was a decision made at a certain point in history. How are we going to survive this destruction? We're going to build a new trinity. No longer temple sacrifices and priests. From now on, the Beit Midrash for learning, the Beit Knesset for prayer, and the Jewish home for chesed. This will now be the place where we meet God. And God will be there to meet you. I promise you, he says. God will be there to meet you. Now, think of what he just did. He had the choice. He could have said, ladies and gentlemen, we have no temple, we have no priest. God has fled the world and rejected us. The Jewish game is over. And no one would have complained. It would have been the right thing to do. Or he could have said, no, no, no. We just go on doing what we always did and forget that the destruction ever happened. That would have made sense to certain people too. What did he do instead? He reinvented the whole tradition. He took the values, the deep core values of Bible, and reworked them into new interpretations and new expressions and new forms and new institutions, and created what we call Judaism. Judaism is a created artifact out of the ashes of a broken temple. We've done this before, and we're terribly good at it. And now we're going to have to do it again. Now we're going to have to do it again, because that's what October 7th is called upon us to do. And you just hired this wonderful young guy and his beautiful, brilliant, amazing wife in order to help you and your wonderful, giving, kind, terrific rabbi and brilliant cantor and educators and administrators to participate in this wonderful process. It's not an easy process. We Jews like doing things the way we always did them. I always thought that the words that should be over the ark, in most synagogues, over the ark are the words, Da milifnei ata omed, know before whom you stand, or Shema Yisrael, or Ani Adonai Elohecha, I am the Lord your God. But most synagogues really ought to put over their ark, because we've always done it that way. But I want you to open your minds and open your hearts and remember, you're not creating a Judaism for your comfort and inspiration. You're creating a Judaism for the comfort and inspiration of your children and your children's children. And that's what we've always been really, really, really good at. And we'll be good at it again. Thanks so much. All right, so I'm going to stay here another 2 or 3 minutes, because then I fall asleep, because now I'm on Pacific time, so this is now my nap time. But if you have a question, an idea, a concern, a better sermon, I'm willing to listen for a few minutes. Anyone have a question? I have as you probably noticed from early this morning, I have the teaching style of Benito Mussolini. But now is your turn. Does anyone have a question they wanted to ask, or a better idea, or a concern, or a counter sermon? Yes, please. Tell me your name, please. Marcy. Hi, Marcy. Hi, welcome.
We're talking about the importance of the study. What are your feelings about what's going on in Israel now, with the Orthodox not wanting to participate in the draft and contemplating study?
You know, the most dangerous question you can ask any Jewish leader right now is, what is your questions about, what are your thinking about Israel and, right? Because anything I say, someone's going to yell at me. So this one, probably not. When David Ben-Gurion launched the state, he made a deal. So, the question is, my thoughts about the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox refusal to serve in the Israeli army. Okay? So here's quick history. In 1935, the British, who were tired of governing Palestine, because we're just so difficult, decided to set up the Peel Commission. And the Peel Commission came to take testimony from Jews and Arabs and others about what should be done with Palestine, with Israel. And David Ben-Gurion was terribly afraid that the leading rabbis would tell the Peel Commission, we don't need a country, because that would ruin our chances of getting a country. So what he did was, he bribed them. And he said, if we ever got a country, your students and children will be exempt from army service. And the rabbis came forward and said, having a Jewish state is exactly what we need, knowing full well that what that meant was, yeah, but we're not going to have to defend it. Okay? Now that, at the time that the country started, in 1948, there were 3,000 Orthodox men who were not going to, of army age. 3,000. Today there's 60,000. Okay? The Israeli army needs the manpower. It is completely, in the eyes of non-Orthodox Jews in Israel, it is completely unjust that a large population lives under the security of their service and doesn't participate in defending the country. So it's completely unjust. The Israeli Supreme Court just said that, right? So there needs to be some accommodation made. The problem is, it's not so easy. I mean, it would seem easy, just say, okay, you're drafted. Except, these guys don't know anything. They know Talmud up the wazoo. I mean, they know the entire tradition by heart. But their learning stops in the 14th century. They don't know English, they don't know math, they don't know science, they're barely literate in Hebrew. The Hebrew they know is Talmudic, so is Yiddish, right? So it's not easy to put these guys into a modern army. So what the bill in front of the Knesset is trying to do, they're trying to figure out how many can the army really absorb. It'll take more manpower to absorb these guys than it will that they'll give back in terms of service. It's a mess. That's the best thing I can say about Israel. It's a mess. What do I think about it? I think it's a shanda that they don't serve, right? It's a shanda. They can at least have national service. Let them teach kindergarten. Let them pick up trash. Let them sweep streets. Let them operate machinery. There's things they can learn how to do. And Israel needs the manpower right now. You know, and that's what I think. But then for some reason they didn't come and ask me. I don't know why. Rabbi in California. So, I don't know what's going to happen. Israel is the internal life of Israel right now, the internal political life of Israel is even more of a soap opera than the internal life of America right now. I mean, it's just a mess. Because there's the coalition, which is made up of the right-wing parties, is divided on this issue. And whether that means the government's going to fall and we'll have new elections, or whether they'll find some kind of compromise, or whether they'll find yet another way to kick this can down the road, I don't know. So I honestly don't know. We'll see what happens. We'll see. And if they do start drafting these guys, what happens then? I mean, are they trainable? Can you do something with them? You know, if the Palestinians ever attacked us on Talmudic basis, we'd be ready with an army of guys. But unfortunately, they're not attacking us with treif chicken. You know, they're attacking us with rockets. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen. So someone had a hand up over here. I successfully stifled. Yes, please. Tell me your name, please. Hi, Roxanne. Hi. Yes.
I'm wondering if maybe that plus what happened this week in the courts will serve as a role model so that we'll see maybe a few more begin.
Yes. So it's a wonderful thought. Thank you. It's a wonderful thought. So here's what's happened. Every summer, my wife and I go to Israel to study at the Hartman Institute. Many summers ago, they took us on a field trip. We go on field trips. And we went to a town called Beitar Eilit, which is slightly south of Jerusalem, still inside the Green Line, but south of Jerusalem. It's an entirely new town, planned town, 30,000 ultra-Orthodox Jews in this town. So we get to meet with the mayor and the city council. The mayor walks in. This is like a Ganza Orthodox Jew, a young guy. He's wearing a black kapota and a hat. He's got payas down to his pupik, right, and a giant beard. He sits down and he introduces himself to us. I forgot his name. He's a 10th generation Orthodox Jew. His whole family lives in Mea Sharim in Jerusalem, but because Mea Sharim is dreadfully crowded right now, because they have a few kids. I don't know if you knew that. He and his family, his wife and their 12 children, moved to this town, and he got involved in the organization of the town, and now he's the mayor. And he says to us, look, this attitude that the state does not belong to us, it worked for us. It worked for us in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. It worked for us in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. It worked for us in the 80s and the 90s. It doesn't work for us now. He said, I am 10th generation Haredi, related to 20 of the most important super Orthodox rabbis in the world, and I belong to a new faction called Dati Le'umi, Haredi Le'umi, nationalist ultra-Orthodox. He says, here's our position. We live in this town. Dell Computers is building a call center in this town. We believe that the best and the brightest should learn all day long. If you are the top 1%, you sit your tuchas down in the base medrash and you learn 24 hours a day. But if you're like the most of us, you'll learn in your off hours and you'll work in your on hours. And we're going to be manning, as it were, man and womaning, because there's women there too. We're going to be staffing that Dell Computer Center. So if you have a Dell computer and it doesn't work, and you call in the middle of the night and say, I can't get the thing to come on right, either they're going to send the call to Bangalore, where a guy with an Indian accent, hello, how are you, is going to fix your computer, or you're going to get Beitar Eilit. Because it turns out that if you can learn Gemara, if you can learn Talmud, you can learn how to repair Dell computers and their software and Microsoft software. And he said, we're going to work for a living. He said, and then someone asked him, are you going to serve? He says, I'm too old to serve, and I have 12 kids. My children will serve. And you're right. There is a small but growing cohort of Haredi men, not women yet, men, who serve in the army. And they're in special units because they have special needs. They have to, certain kinds of food, certain kinds of hours, Shabbat kinds of, and guess what they're really good at? Intelligence, computer warfare, technology, because the same kind of structured thinking that it takes to get through a sugya of Talmud, a section of Talmud, can get you through a software program pretty quickly. And you're right, it's a small group. Now, somebody asked him, what does your father think of this? And he put his head down. He said, please don't ask me that. His father thinks he's a heretic. The guy is kapota, beard. His father thinks he's a heretic. He said, but we know, we can see the writing on the wall. He said, we can see that we can't keep taking from this society without giving something back. It's a small percentage, but it's there. It's a seed that's been planted. It's a small percentage, but it's not nothing. And it's growing. It's growing. It's growing. And the reason it's growing is because it's clear to these people, that you can't keep asking secular Tel Aviv Israelis to defend you, to pay for you, to protect you, without contributing something back. They know that there is a tipping point of sustainability. One of the reasons why this bill has never come to the Knesset is because they're terrified that if they get voted out, the government that will come in will not include them and will simply have a blanket rule that says all of you serve. So the sustainability of an ultra-Orthodox community of hundreds of thousands of people who give nothing back to the society but take an awful lot from it, that is a question that is now possessing the young ultra-Orthodox leadership in Israel. Who knows where it will go? A prophet, I'm not. But that's something, you're exactly right, and your question is exactly the right question. Yeah, but if each of his 12 children serve in the IDF and each of his 12 children learn computer programming skills and actually contribute to the economy, then you're going to have a different Israel a generation from now. You might have an Israel that's a lot more religious, but a lot more productive. You see? So we'll see where this goes. I can't tell you, I'm just telling you that it's not completely hopeless. By now you think that I'm this hopeless person. You can't wait for me to go back to California. But it's not completely hopeless. There is really a seed of hope here, which I think is very promising. Yes, please, tell me your name, please. Josh, can you stand up? Because I don't hear real well. I don't listen at all, but I don't hear real well either. So go ahead.
So going back to what you were saying before, and just for context, I agree with you about the need to find new ways.
You're a wise man. I'm a big fan of Pesach myself. So Josh asked a great question. He says, look, so we're going to, John, that's Josh, that's John. You guys get me mixed up. We're going to be seeing change come to our faith and to our culture. What don't we give up? Here's what's interesting. So if you look at Rabbinic Judaism and Biblical Judaism, and then you look at later medieval both mystical and philosophical Judaism. Look at Hasidic Judaism. And look at in all of those permutations of change that came to us, what didn't we give up? I'm kidding when I said Pesach, but I'm not. We didn't give up our calendar. The Jewish calendar is still the same calendar. Purim, Pesach, Shavuos, Tisha B'Av, right? Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, because those holidays mark moments in our past and they mark gathering points. Now, we may celebrate those holidays differently, right? In my mother's house, we broke fast on bagels and lox and cream cheese, right? In our house, it's gluten-free bagels, salt-free lox, and fat-free cream cheese, right? In my kid's house, it'll be tofu and God knows. But, you know, I mean, so we'll, you know, different ways we'll celebrate, different melodies to the prayers, but the prayers, some of the key prayers will stay the same. The Torah will stay the same. That is, we will always look to Torah for truth, right? But we'll have different interpretations of Torah, right? Which we've always done. So, and then, of course, the notion of monotheism, of oneness of God, the idea that ethics are the place where God meets the world, and that we have an obligation to rebuild the world and bring tikkun, to bring wholeness to the world. The major themes of our faith and culture will not change, but the ways that we practice them and interpret them will. And I can't tell you exactly how. There's a guy in Berkeley he grew up in my shul. He went to Berkeley. Berkeley's a very interesting place. I don't know if you've ever been there. And they started a thing called Urban Adamah. Adamah means earth. It's a Jewish farm. And it's the most popular place. Families go there on Sundays. Hebrew schools go there. Teenagers go there. They're running a farm. And they're using a farm as an outdoor classroom for teaching Torah. Think about that, right? You know, I mean, just there are new ways of, Israel is a new way of expressing Judaism, right? I mean, so you have to know that we've always been doing this. I don't know exactly, I mean, Israel's an interesting example because Israel was a rebellion against Jewish tradition, right? The tradition was only the Messiah could bring us back to Israel. But my Zionist ancestors, my parents, for example, they were kibbutzniks. They broke from their Orthodox families and moved to Israel. My teacher, David Hartman, of blessed memory, used to say, that's like a kid who gets mad at his parents, swears he's leaving home, packs his things, walks out the door, slams the door, crosses the street, and moves in with his grandmother. Right? We're rebelling against Judaism by rebuilding the land of Israel. Just think of the irony of that, you know? That's exactly what this is. So there will be things that don't change. The key orientation points won't change, but the style, the melody will change. I think that's as much as I can say. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm asking you to look forward to it. I'm asking you to support it and not be afraid of it and participate in it. And not everything's going to work. Not everything's going to work, right? There was a group of Jews in the first century who followed a guy named Joshua, right? He got himself crucified. They invented Christmas trees. And we said, you know, that doesn't work for us. They did well anyway, don't worry. You know, but so we decided that was not, no, I'm serious. Christianity was a branch of Judaism in the first, second, and third centuries. Then we decided mutually to divorce. We decided not to, and because Christianity ceased to be an authentic expression of what we felt was core Judaism, and it ceased to be what we felt was a fruitful branch of the Jewish development, so we let it go, and it went on its way and did very nicely. Thank you very much. What will happen in America? I don't know. We'll see what comes next, and you just have to enjoy watching the process work forward. All right, a couple more questions, and then I'm going to go to sleep. In the back, gentlemen, could you stand up because I can barely see you, much less.
I can talk loud.
What's your name?
My name is Michael.
Michael.
Thank you for what I'm taking away as optimism in the construct of Judaism, not just surviving, but thriving in crises and challenges.
Yeah.
But in the cases of Herzl, your great authors, there have been leaders or leadership that have helped that process and accelerate it.
Yes.
Talk about where we are now and how we're in. You see that kind of leadership or leaders evolve.
Yeah, you just hired 2 of them. It's right here. No, Michael, I'm serious about this. Look, you know, rabbis are really good at depressing congregations. And if I wanted to, I could make you cry. Right? You know it. Remember Abba Eban. Remember the great Abba Eban? He once said, Jews are the only people in the world refuse to take yes for an answer. You know, Jewish Telegram says, worry, details are following. You know, I mean, we've never failed to see the cloud behind a silver lining. You know, we are so good at pessimism. We are so good at crisis mentality. We are so good at being depressed. You know, we're like the champions of being depressed, right? So I decided I'm going to be a revolutionary. I'm going to be the only optimist in the Jewish world. You want to hear optimism, Michael? A dying people doesn't create this. A dying people doesn't inspire a young person with so much talent, ability, intellect, and character to devote his life to teaching Torah. And his wife, who's equally, or actually more brilliant than him, right? The smartest thing he ever did is marry a woman brighter than he is. Me too. His father too, right? You know, and the truth is, a dying people doesn't nurture this kind of personality. A dying people doesn't create a rabbi this kind, this gentle, this giving. A dying people doesn't create the kind of creativity. Yes, I know. That was too much optimism for you. So already you're saying, does he not know? Does he not? You know, I know the statistics better than you do. Intermarriage, disaffiliation, disaffection, alienation. I know. We've never been a big people, right? Somebody once pointed out that there are fewer Jews in the world than the statistical error in the census of mainland China, which means they lose more Chinese people every year than there are us to begin with, you know? Like, we're not a big people. We'll never be a big people. We don't need to be a big people. We've been a small people with a very big idea, right? But a dying people doesn't generate the kind of creativity that you see all around us. You listen to your cantor, Daven? Do you understand what that means, right? I grew up in a world with chazanim. You know, old guys with mean temperaments and big yarmulkes. They had big yarmulkes and their hearts were a little strange. You know, I mean, just, you know, and here you have this gorgeous, wonderful voice, this beautiful soul praying for you, and a woman and with new melody. It's gorgeous. A dying people doesn't create new melodies. You get it? So I may be the only optimist left in the Jewish world. You can come touch me if you want, right? You really can. Yes, there's tsuris here, there's tsuris in Israel. First of all, there's in Israel. Just remember that. As much as we screw it up, there's in Israel. And there's, you know, and here we have the advent of a new generation with great joy. Look, I'll give you an example. In April 1964, Look magazine. Somebody remember Look magazine? It was the second biggest news magazine in North America after Life magazine. Look magazine, April 1964, senior editor Thomas Murphy publishes an article called The Vanishing American Jew. And he gathers all these statistics, and he says, 1964, you know, we're entering the third generation of American Jewish settlement since the large immigration from Eastern Europe. In American life, there's a law called Hanson's Law that says first generations survive and thrive, second generations are ambivalent, third generations begin to assimilate, fourth generations disappear, fifth generations are gone. There's no Italians living in Little Italy. None, right? Right? None. In my neighborhood, there's a little Tokyo. There's no Japanese people live there. None, right? By the fifth generation, you intermarry, you become American. No one knows who you are. He said in 1964, American Jews will begin to wane by 1980 and will practically disappear by the turn of the century, by 2000. Well, here's what's great. Look magazine is gone, and we're here. How do you explain that? Sociology can't explain that. There's no sociology that explains the persistence of this people. So either you're religious like me and you say, because God's not done with us yet, or you say there is something in the character of this people that Hanson's Law doesn't speak to, that the sociology doesn't speak to, some quality of connectedness, some quality of truth that this people holds on to that isn't vulnerable to the problem, to the exigencies of sociology as we know it now. There's something about this people, Michael, and we're not done. And God's not done with us. And you've just hired these two brilliant young kids to bring you into this next generation, along with this brilliant, wonderful, gentle, compassionate, kind. I can't say enough things about him because he's so humble, he won't listen to me. But, you know, this wonderful guy and the wonderful staff you've gathered here, right? This is the revolution you're seeing. and I thank you for being part of it. Thanks very much.